How's it going, folks? I know I've been a bit busy here lately, and I know there's been some topics I wanted to discuss, but there's actually one point that got brought up in a conversation I had between a friend of mine and myself. Now, I think this is pretty important because I think this is a trap that a lot of people fall into, at least on the Pro 2A side of things. And usually it will come up as, say, in an argument with a gun controller. A gun controller will say, well, you need licensing, registration, insurance, and all this for a car. Why shouldn't it be the same for guns? And of course, the person on the Pro 2A side of things will say, well, is a car in the Bill of Rights? And obviously the answer is driving a car is not explicitly protected under the Bill of Rights. That part is true. And in fact, every single condition a gun controller brings up, it is not about the ownership of a car. You don't have to have a license to own a car. You don't have to have that car registered. You don't have to have insurance, working headlights, or any of that stuff merely to own a car or even drive that car on your own private property. All those conditions come up when you want to drive on a public roadway, which public roadway is infrastructure that has to be maintained, usually done by the government. And therefore these terms generally are a lot more easier to accept. The trap is when you say, is it explicitly protected by the Bill of Rights? And the answer is no. What you're saying is that, okay, anything not in the Bill of Rights, is up to the state to decide. And that's one, it's not true. And the second portion of this is that you give the state a lot of license to do whatever the hell they want, so long as they're not violating the Bill of Rights. And in many cases, there are a lot of violations of the Bill of Rights that it seems like some people who call themselves pro QA are okay with. I mean, let me ask you all this. How did you like the lockdowns that happened in certain states? I didn't. What'd you think of the mask mandates? What do you think of forcing people to take an experimental vaccine? You don't need the Bill of Rights to tell you the government's overstepping their boundaries on this one, and they are violating certain rights, such as the right to bodily autonomy. I know it's not explicitly protected by the Bill of Rights, but it's kind of common sense. So, with that being said, you are setting a dangerous precedent when you make the argument, is it in the Bill of Rights? Well, it isn't, then it's not a right. If something's not a right, you can be able to explain how it isn't a right or how it is a right, vice versa, if it is a right. Usually it's pretty simple. Hey, are you harming somebody else? Are you defrauding somebody else? Are you stealing from somebody else? Okay, well, you're not violating their rights. There's a good chance that, you have the right to do that. Does this activity require somebody else to give up their time, their life, or anything like that? If it does, it's probably not a right. I mean, there are obvious exceptions, like as if you're accused of a crime, you do have a right to a trial by a jury of your peers. I mean, that does require other people's time and effort. That would be one thing. But there are very few things of that nature that you could call rights. You know, so with that being said, we really do need to try to be more consistent on other areas as well. I've known some pro 2A people who were perfectly okay and actually even supportive of the war on drugs and criminalization of drugs. Well, let me ask you this: How do you think it sounds to somebody who chooses to partake in a little bit of marijuana, cocaine, or stuff like that, when you say, it's your right to own and carry your AR-15, but they can't do any of that stuff because, they might end up killing themselves, overdosing, or committing a crime against somebody else. That's not very consistent, at least not in my mind. Um, you know, and I could be saying certain things to the left right now because I know there are certain freedoms that generally are valued by the right, and certain freedoms that are generally opposed by the right, and there are certain freedoms that are generally valued by the left, and certain freedoms that are generally opposed by the left. If you want to just take that two-dimensional, oh well, actually one-dimensional political compass, but I see it as a bit more complicated than that. So I do think we ourselves need to be consistent. I mean, for those of you who are more right leaning, value your freedom to own and carry firearms, value your 2A rights, and I mean genuinely value 2A and not just, well, I value the 2A so long as I get to keep my duck gun. Uh, but other than that, I'm perfectly fine with somebody's AR-15 getting banned, so on and so forth. How did it look to you guys watching the meltdown over Roe v. Wade being overturned, and then these same people having a meltdown over the Bruin decision? I bet there was a lot of you who sat there and said, holy shit, you're so upset about somebody being able to carry one of these after they've met all the criteria, all the objective criteria to getting a permit, and now the court's telling that particular state that they can't just willy-nilly deny that person after they've met all the objective criteria. But yet, you think you have a right to end a human being's life. Now, and yes, abortion is that. Now we can argue viability, and I personally think that, yeah, as long as you get it prior to the fetal stages, I don't like it, but they haven't developed sentience yet. They haven't developed conscience yet, and they haven't developed the very cells that would cause them to feel pain or anything like that. Now, once it starts to get to the fetal stage, that's a different issue, and then that should be left for medical reasons. For the most part, that's my basic opinion on it. So, but yeah, again, look at the meltdowns that all the abortionists had over Roe v. Wade being overturned, and how many of them had a meltdown over the Bruin decision. And yeah, I bet that looked ridiculous to a lot of you guys out there. So, I mean, this we got to understand when we start getting ridiculous too. Thank you all for watching. Y'all take it easy out there and have a great day.